Peace, peace. I feel like every now and then I gotta get on here and have to deal with some things like, I don't like to text on Facebook a lot. I mean, right on Facebook, I like to just make a statement and study the minds of the people and our growth, our development and things. This communication as of recent is the misunderstanding, or rather the statement of the terminology Allah in person. In some forms, the usage of Allah in person has become as if something is embedded in an individual, or something comes within the universal, the individual, instead of looking at it as physics and looking at it as science. The Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad said that Allah appeared in the person of Master Farad Muhammad. Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan gave an understanding to this by giving an allegory between the electricity and the bulb. Okay? So he felt that, the electricity within the bulb, so therefore in his breakdown to express something to the rest of the Islamic world and even to some of the believers who may not be able to handle such strong meat as the ultimate reality of man being Allah. He used the terminology like that. Now, this is where I go a little bit deeper in regards to that reality. There is a separation of the electricity and the bulb only by the activity of the energy or the static, right? Because the electricity is made up of the same exact energy or substance of the universe as the bulb, right? So if the electricity is made up of the same substance for which produces the bulb, then that means that the substance, that the electricity and the bulb are in reality an expression of the one source or the particular force or energy for which is expressing itself according to frequency and the usage of man in two different realities. Peace, peace, Lord. In two different realities. But nonetheless, it is still exactly the same exact material, just being expressed due to frequency. In the ancient Kemetic systems and African systems, spirit and matter was one. We're just talking about frequencies of vibration. The more rapid a particular frequency or movement is, we consider that to be non-material. The more denser of that or slower of that, the more material that we consider it to be. But in reality, it is still the same exact material. There is no difference when you are looking at it from a God perspective and looking at it as mathematics and looking at it from a scientific perspective and aspect of view. So therefore, when we look at it, and let's say if we was to take a frequency at its highest level, we will be looking at that frequency permeating itself into the depthness of different frequencies or orders, for which we will call planes. They then call these planes dimensions, when in reality they are just different frequencies of vibration, right? So the spirit, or what we will call spirit, or that intelligence or divinity, rapidly moving at a certain rate, as it begins to slow on different frequencies, it begins to take on different forms, right? Indeed. Thank you. It begins to take on different forms, but nonetheless, it is the same exact substance. That substance for which we call God, or that force, or that power, or whatever you want to call it, the divine intelligence, the consciousness, or just energy or intelligent matter, whatever you choose to call it, it did not create something which was different than itself. It didn't create something which was different than itself. You understand what I'm saying? Your door ain't closed. It didn't create something that was different from itself. It is the same exact substance. It is consciousness manifesting itself in myriads of forms. This is what the ancient Egyptians knew. This is why they said, every part of me is of the gods. Every part of me. Because the gods then represents principles of natural of natural and universal law. It represents the material that exists within that, not only just psychological principles that exist within the subconscious mind, but it is representing different stages of this development. So when we are sitting down and we are saying, when that statement that all of me is of the gods, I am Ra, I am Kepra, I am these things, it's because these principles is imbued within man. It is man. It is not that it is separate from us. So when we make the statement that Allah appeared in the person, think of that. Because the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad also in an article in the 1960s said that you cannot go beyond the limitations of the first God because it came down through us and he is now in all our persons. So he did in that manner, he didn't make a distinguishing remark between yourself and that of Master Farad Muhammad. What separates Master Farad Muhammad from the regular or the gods in their reality is that he has become illuminated by becoming one with the Godhead, or the true reality and essence of his being, that divine intelligence. So therefore he becomes superior in knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. Right? So that is what separates. But in reality, if we look at Allah in person dealing with science, then we will think of it as energy, first at one state in rate of rapid reality, slowing down and lowering down until eventually it creates a denser form. That is Allah in person. For instance, let me make an example. When you look at a wall that's in front of you, how many times do you actually pay attention that there are many billions of life forms or billions of living forms that is existing between you and that wall? We call that matter. Within that, we have space. Can you see the matter that exists between you and the wall? No, that's not real. But if I take that same matter for which formulates and create that and manifest into sperm, and I manifest that into an egg, and I take that same intelligence that manifests within your brain and that will to produce out of your brain to eventually copulate and produce a child or produce an animal, is that not then Allah in person? Where is that separate from the reality of things then? It isn't. We have a misunderstanding. Consciousness manifests itself within form, yes, but it manifests itself within form because its co-creator is tone. Because of tone, things take on certain vibratory rates, take on certain forms and structures and systems because of that, right? So if we don't see what is Allah in person, it is not like something is coming down to enter into a being that makes him what he is. It is the elevation into the higher hierarchy of his own being that makes him personate. In other words, the ego becomes subdued, and the man then goes into the higher depths of his own nature, for which is the originator. They call that in Rosicrucian systems and Golden Dawns as becoming one with the universal mind, or what they call the cosmic intelligence, right? But is not the entire state of your being that for which you call? Is not the entire state of your being that for which you call the all in all? The Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad defined Allah as being the wisdom of all civilized nations. It's very important of these words. What does that mean? When we look at Allah, what separates you from Master Farad Muhammad? What separates you and I from each other? An illusion. Because it's the same substance. So when we say, do you worship Master Farad Muhammad? No, I don't worship Master Farad Muhammad because he flesh. Stop. What separates your belief from the belief of a Christian? What separates your belief from the belief of a Sunni Muslim? What is the separation of the two? Because listen, If you look at the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, see, we got to get out of spookiness. If we look at the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, we say he's the messenger of Allah, and brothers say he's the Christ and he's alive, you don't think you're worshiping? Of course you're worshiping. When you go see Big Brother Minister Farrakhan and you cheering, oh, I love him, you can't say nothing. He is divine. What you think you're doing? You're worshiping. What is worshiping to you? Because you're worshiping. Are these individuals supreme in knowledge, wisdom, and understanding? Have they mastered themselves? But you're worshiping. Because worship is reverence of a thing. When you acknowledge the reverence and divinity of a thing, that is worship. It is all worship. But how do you believe? Now listen. And I'm going to tell you how I pray. Prayer to me is not requesting anything. Prayer to me is my will and my desire set forth to be born. Minister Farrakhan gave us science. He said that prayer is the reaffirmation of desire. What does that mean? If you look within the systems, they call that precipitation. In other words, the ability to bring your will or what's in your mind into manifestation. Right? So, whether you go within the sciences, whether you go within simple physics, whether you go within prayer and the sciences which is used throughout religions, it is the same thing, just in a different language, in a different context. But nonetheless, it is the same. So when we look at Master Farad Muhammad as the supreme being, we're talking about an individual who had reached mastery of his very nature. Mastery of himself, and thus made him master of the universe. Right? So now, what would be wrong when in tuning your mind with something of such heights? What would be wrong with that? There is nothing wrong with that. This is a science that was used all through ancient Egypt, whether you deal with Sufism and the sheikhs, whether you deal with the systems by the Hindu, the Buddhists, in communication with their avatars, no matter whatever you call it, it is real if it is real to you. So when I look at prayer, I have different levels of prayer. If I'm entering in order to bring my desire into being, I'm not talking about formalized salat. I'm talking about every thought as a prayer. I'm talking about sitting down, meditating, holding within inside of your mind an actual image and then seeing it into fruition within your mind and then putting all of your emotions behind it in order to bring it into reality. Walaikum salam. To bring it into reality. That is my prayer. That is controlled. I call that willed prayer. It is not to supplicate and request. It is to give order and structure to, in order to bring forth my will. And then, when I enter into prayer sometimes, I visualize myself sitting before myself. Because that self for which I give projection to represents my own divine nature. The Isan al-Kamil, the Adam Kadmon, the original man, or the originator, personified before my being. Because the mind deals with images. The mind deals with symbols. You see what I'm saying? So therefore, by giving structure to that, I then communicate with that. In order to control that, or in order to in tune within that. For everything in existence is based upon your imagination and your intent in that for which you have willed to accept as being. It's not separate. The subconscious mind do not know the difference of a man having a wet dream than a man that is actually performing a sexual act with a woman before him. The subconscious mind don't know the difference. The body goes through the same exact thing. Because the only way that the difference is held is because the conscious mind or conscious brain holds this into check and has been fundamentally broken down to separate and categorize what we consider our imagination from what we deem as reality. Indeed, saying Bismillah is not just a prayer, it's an invocation. If we take prayer beyond the standard usage that we use it in the religious terms, it will be an invocation. All right? So, when I say in the name of Allah, I am invoking the very nature of my being. That's why when the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, in an article entitled Peace and Contentment, he made a statement in Peace and Contentment. He said that when we say peace, God, we are in fact acknowledging the very nature of our being. The very nature of our being. So every time that I invoke in the name of Allah, I am invoking in my very nature, not a mystery God. So when we look at Master Farad Muhammad, I don't look at Master Farad Muhammad as something separate from me. I look at him as my divine nature impersonified in his person, meaning as an individual unto himself. But yet it is still me, beyond the limitations of the ego or the individualized objectified reality that we have produced for ourselves. So, when we sit down and we say that one is imbued with supreme knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, when you're sick, you go to the hospital, right? When you go to a hospital, you ask that doctor to heal you, correct? Okay. You're not looking at a mystery God. You may set forth your prayer, but who's the one that's answering the prayer? So who is the God actually healing you, and who is the God answering that for what you request? The doctor. When you need to learn something and you need an answer, you go to an educator. The educator then answers your questions and direct you to where you go and you learn. If you are dealing with men, especially those who have studied the systems, you know that things exist that we call masters. Whether it's Baba G and all of that, what we think this is a myth? Would you think all of these great men throughout the ages of time wrote about how Baba G manifested themselves while they was meditating in the Himalayan mountain ridge, or the Saint Germains appeared during this time? You think after hundreds and hundreds of years that all of these people are lying? They're not. It is that the reality of man being God, like for real, is still separate from your intelligence and what you have consciously been able to accept. If I choose to attune into what I consider to be my higher reality, I personally has meditated and pictured and held the Savior's picture in my mind in order to gain a bridge and to connect my psyche with his. Why do you think you cite a lesson? The lesson is his will manifested. Each thought holds a vibration. By going through citing answers and questions, you are becoming in tune with the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad and his teacher, Master Farad Muhammad. Therefore, your frequency of your brain waves are becoming in line with his. This is how come when I go into the lessons, I visualize Master Farad Muhammad asking me the lesson, and I am answering the lesson because it's my question. When I go deeper into it, I then consider Master Farad Muhammad, who is asking me the question, representing my own inner reality of supreme being, or that original man of my divine nature. The Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad then takes on the persona of that divine being, or the consciousness of my being. that cries within the wilderness of my nature. It becomes one and the same, just on different levels of frequency, depending on my intent of what I'm doing. If I want to communicate with divine or the universal soul, right? Then believe me, when I sit within that darkness, I silence my mind. I allow for the thoughts to travel and let my mind search for its source, which we have deemed the originator, the causative principle. I let it look for its source to become once in tuned and imbued with it, separate from the ego. When I want to go higher within my own divine nature or talk to my own higher persona, which is the aspect of myself that talks to me, right? Because there's an aspect of yourself that sees when you don't see, hear when you don't hear. Thus, the Quran teaches us that Allah has an internal and an external form, right? That means he also has what you consider to be a finite and an infinite form, right? So then, therefore, I see myself before myself, and I communicate with myself in order to make union with myself. But then there are times, indeed, when I need to talk to that for which may be greater than me, as far as in supreme wisdom, knowledge, understanding, my bigger brother or greater brothers along the scale of evolution into self-mastery. And when I do that, I visualize He Allah, and I communicate outright, and I'm always answered. So I don't know to what the misunderstanding is or what this is used for, because it doesn't matter if you believe this or believe that. Is what is the intent of you, and not to say what you believe or believe that, because belief is the core of manifestation, right? But when you say, well, Allah came in a person, the question is, what do you mean? Because what I'm starting to believe is that many people believe that when they say Allah in a person, it means that Allah has taken over this being. Nah. Man is already Allah. That's a mystery God concept. It ain't that Allah has taken over the being. Man is Allah. You mean that man subdues his ego and he become one and in tune with the higher reality, or what you will call the higher consciousness. But now let's go a little bit further than that. There are masters that exist in this world that can communicate with you and use you for the purpose, because everybody is not in tune, but there are men that are in tune, and these men become the safeguards in the hierarchies of the gates. Look it up. Study what I'm telling you, because you can research this. What do you think the dictatorate is? What do you think, the 12 scientists is a myth? It's not a myth. You think that Aleister Crowley can create something called the Call of the Aethers, where he is communicating with 24 men? If it's a myth, in Africa they got 12 elders. Study it. Amongst the Shia, there are 12 imams. Study it. There are 12 amongst the dictatorate. Study it. This is not a myth. These are masters that exist amongst us. In a book that I'm telling you, you will love. It's called Brother of the Third Degree. You can download this book offline for free. Read the book. Read the book. When you get done reading the book, you will come to a deep understanding that nothing in that book was a myth. Nothing. But it talks about these masters and these higher schools. And then it talks about these hierarchies. And then these brothers in their initiation start to come over there and they get initiated. And then in the book, they start to discuss how Saint Germain is one of the messengers that come from this hierarchy, right? And then this hierarchy, and in order to keep things in tune, they go to emperors and all of that in order to move the emperors, in order to do certain things, in order to bring forth certain results and evolution in human discovery and evolution of man upon the spiritual path. Book is heavy. It goes in. And you would think that whoever wrote that book came directly out of the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. What has happened is the Savior gave to us that for which is known amongst men who are initiated, in women who are initiated within systems into the highest reaches of mastery. They gave it to babes, and the babes took it as a joke. That's a fact. But those people in the mystery systems, they not laughing at that. They know what it is. S.L. McGregor Matthews was visiting. Crowley was visiting. Find out about it. It is a fact. This ain't something that we got to make up. If you don't believe, then try it. Why did the messenger tell us to pray to Master Farad Muhammad? Of course. Listen, I'm talking.
I need the keys.
You know where the keys at? Of course. Bring it back.
Can I get some food?
No. Of course, Master Farad Muhammad, ultimately, will one day his physical form will leave. That my door, I know. His physical form will definitely leave. Guaranteed. Once that form leaves, do you still pray to him? This is where your higher intellect comes into play. Master Farad Muhammad take on two realities depending on what level you are discussing. He takes on the reality of a person, and he takes on the reality of a principle. So he takes on the reality of a person, and he takes on the reality of a principle. As a personage, he will be considered our great brother upon the line of self-mastery. These individuals you can tune in on. Thus our messenger told us that we can what? If we go up in the room and we visualize or hold the image of that person.
Bull for the refrigerator right there.
All right, let him in.
All right.
Of that person within your mind, you can communicate with them. He said that you have to clean up that rusty spot of your brain, in your spiritual part of your brain. He said, meditate upon the will and you can hear her engines. What does that mean? What does it mean? These are levels of understanding, man. Master Farad Muhammad is my sheikh. I communicate with the God. And that's a fact. And I have never come unanswered. That do not take away my own divinity of God. There are levels of understanding of growth and procedure. You have the brothers that's in Sufism and the moderates and all of them. They communicate with their sheikhs. Their sheikhs appear before them. It happens. You don't believe me? Study the brothers in Africa. You'll find out for yourself. This is not a lie. We have to get out of spookism. And what we got to do is get deeper in our understanding and our divinity that there are levels to these teachings. The purpose of accepting Allah as Allah in the person Master Farad Muhammad is that you and I can see the possibility and the reality of Allah being you in your person. It's in your person. But it is not some spirit floating around in space entering into you. Unless you're talking about a feeling. Unless you are talking about the mind. But it's not the mind coming in you. You are the mind. You open yourself up to be receptive to higher frequencies of thought. It's not deep in that sense. So when the ego is removed, then you become a reciprocal of the divine. That is what's taking place. But it is not separate from you. It is you. It's just a different aspect of you. Your true self. It's not gone. Even after you physically leave this earth. If you had children, you live forever. But what happens to the physical form? Think about it. Even after this shell leaves, do you think that the form for which you have produced does not manifest itself upon the ethers of matter? Yes. You don't think your consciousness continuously to vibrate? Yes. It doesn't dissipate. It exists. You are forever. But look at a live person as something, as physics, from subtler planes of energy to denser planes of energy. So from a subtler plane you existed to a denser plane you existed. Therefore, it is Allah in person. When one ascertains, quiet the ego and go into the recesses of their being and therefore begin to communicate or vibrate at higher levels of rapidity, then that becomes one who becomes in tune with the conscious or universal mind, the original man, that originator, that primal self. But it is still you. It's not separate from you. It is you. So some pray to Master Farad Muhammad. Ultimately, you're praying to yourself. Because nothing exists but yourself. But that does not take away that this man has reached such a level. Who would not want to communicate with such a master, for which will assist you in your mastery of yourself? Isn't that a beautiful thing, to have such a helper? Just think again. That's all I'm saying. Allah is one. There is no separation from the originator and Master Farad Muhammad, from the originator and yourself or anything else. That is an illusion. So praying to Master Farad Muhammad is praying to the originator and praying to yourself, your own innate being. It is the same. It is the exact same. This is simple. And if you choose not to, that doesn't take from you. The same is still the same. You can do it. In tune in thyself and be one with thyself. But believe me, we are always in a state of worship. You cheering on Minister Farrakhan and think he the divine is worship. You do it to the messenger, it's worship. You do it when you're like a new car. It's amazing. Oh man, my car, it's worship. It's all worship. Study what the messenger said. He said that idolatry is not the worship. He said it's the worship of things, not persons. Look at that. Idolatry is not is the worship of things, not of persons. Look at that. It's very important to understand that. What did he mean? That Allah, that we could not go beyond the limitations of the first God, so he came down through us, and he is now in all our persons. What do that mean? You are the originator. A person can look at a statue, and if they use the statue in order to, and that statue take on a divine reality to them, then the statue then become the inhibitor, or for which becomes the crucible used in order for them to communicate with their own divine nature. It's just that the people get caught up at the statue. I'm not telling you to get stopped at the person of Master Farad Muhammad. I'm telling you that he's the tool and the representation of your own divine nature. One day, sit down, quiet your mind, and visualize him in your mind, and communicate with him. See what you get. I have. It works. It works. Ask, and you will receive. This is used throughout all the systems of magic. It's used. Use it. And then there are greater levels where he no longer exists within that, but yet he exists as the essence of you. It is all the same. It's just that how you look at it. All right? I gotta go. Salam Allah. Salam alaikum. Peace to the gods.